Years ago, my dad was 45 when he had his first triple bypass. And, still this day, at 83, has heart conditions and stuff. But there was one year where a lady that was the secretary at her church was just like at a stoplight, and she had to stop because an ambulance went by. And she didn't know that it was my dad, her boss, her pastor, that was in the ambulance, but she just prayed for him. And she said that her whole life, she's just had this thing. Whenever she hears of an accident or hears a siren, she just stops and prays. And I just thought that was so cool. She had no clue that she knew the person in there and that he was having a heart attack. But, that was one of the miraculous times when the Lord saved his life. So I've always appreciated that. So just something that's good to get into. Hey, just a quick reminder, services this weekend are normal times, and they will be fairly normal to our normal services, except that we'll probably do more Christmas songs, I assume. Yeah? Yeah, okay, more Christmas songs. How many of you like Christmas songs? Okay, was that you saying yes, Mindy?
Yes, I love them.
Okay, I'm like, somebody over here is really excited all of a sudden. So yeah, we'll be doing more Christmas songs, and we won't be in our normal place in Luke. We'll do more of a Christmas or Advent message for Sunday. And then on Christmas Eve, the services at 4, 5:30, and 7 o'clock. Love it if you can come. Remember, too, this is the time of year where a lot of times friends or family that normally are afraid or embarrassed or just won't go to church are willing to come with you. And I know I've already invited different people that are friends of mine that are saying, yeah, I'll come to Christmas Eve. I'll do that. And what a neat opportunity for them to be able to come and just be a part of us for that. So get a little bold, if you would. You never know. There'll be seating in here and overflow in this room as well. With that, we're going to be in Luke chapter 18 tonight, starting at verse 9. How many of you were here on Sunday? Okay. How many of you were awake on Sunday? That's maybe what I should ask. We're in a section of Luke as we're going through the Gospel of Luke where Jesus is headed toward Jerusalem. In fact, the next chapter is one of my favorite passages in the Bible, the story of Zacchaeus. Relate to it for multiple reasons. But we're coming up very quickly on the story of the triumphal entry, when Jesus actually enters into Jerusalem. But what's happening in this section of the Gospel of Luke is Jesus is explaining to his disciples that while they're going to Jerusalem, there's going to be a time that he's going to go away, and how they are to be his disciples, his followers, how to live out his teachings while he is gone. They haven't comprehended yet what is happening, that he's actually talking about a death, burial, and resurrection. If we've been around church for any time or you've read the Gospels, you know that's what's going to happen. Heck, I think probably most people in our culture know that that's what happened. It's not like I'm ruining that story for anybody. But you look at it, and at this time, they did not comprehend that whatsoever. That somebody would be declaring to them, I'm going to die, be buried, and I'm going to raise again. Let alone the whole concept of the fact that he would ascend to heaven, be gone, and that there would be a second coming. This wasn't on their radar whatsoever. And they're going to be shocked by it, but what we find in Acts is that after the resurrection and the ascension, all of these different things start making sense to them, and they start applying them to their lives. What we see in what we studied on Sunday and tonight are two parables having to do with prayer. I shared on Sunday, I'm not the man of prayer that I want to be. I'm not the man of prayer that I want to be. I'm trying to head that direction. And over the years, especially over the last probably 6 years, have tried to carve more time out in my schedule for prayer. For me, like I shared last Sunday, it comes in the form of going on a lot of walks, sitting out on my front porch or my back porch. I I like to sit out on my back porch and pray. I do have this neighbor a lot of times when I'm trying to pray that peeks his head around the fence and says hi to me, Bill. And I love that. It's one of those things. A lot of times we think of prayer in a certain framework, depending on maybe how we were raised or what we've seen. I had one pastor friend of mine that when he first became a pastor, he thought he had to pray kneeling with candles lit. And so he would do that in his office, but he somehow set the fire alarm off once, and fire department showed up and stuff. But it's nothing like that. Prayer is just a conversation with God, an ongoing conversation where we talk, but we also listen to him. And on Sunday, what we learned is Jesus encouraging people to be persistent, consistent in prayer, and to not lose heart, but just to keep praying our prayer requests until we get an answer. And I know for me, that's something on Sunday, I was preaching to myself with that one. There's certain things in my life where I have been praying for them, and sometimes I just want to give up. I just want to give up. But he answers, and my experience has been, when he answers in his own time and all the time better than I ever imagined. One story I've told a few times, there was a point in my life where I went on a run. I was in my 20s, went on a run in the middle of the night. I was working swing shifts at the time and got off work at midnight, went out, and it was actually off Territorial Road about a block up here where I just was praying, but I couldn't take it anymore. I was mad at God, and I just had a shouting match with God. Oddly enough, he always wins those. But I just started literally in the middle of the night, that weird guy that woke people up and dogs started barking at me and everything. After releasing that and just yelling at God, I felt better and I felt a peace come over me. And if you're wondering, is that okay to do? Yeah, read the Psalms. In the Psalms, you see a lot of those prayers where people are frustrated or angry at God. Here's the thing, though. What you find in Psalms is people's frustration with God isn't directed this way, where they're bashing, mocking, or gossiping about God. It's directed this way, talking to God face to face. And that's what you see with David. Fast forward 10 years later, I was in my 30s, and by that time, I was in the middle of the night. I was no longer jogging in the middle of the night, I was walking. And I was just praising the Lord, and I got to the same spot, and it hit me that 10 years previously, I had shouted at God. I was mad. There were 3 things I prayed for. And in that time, a decade worth of time, God answered all 3 prayer requests in ways I never imagined he would answer them. And the way he answered them was so much better than what I ever imagined. Just so much better. And that's been the story of my life. I mean, even when you look at our church and being in here, I am so thankful that tonight we're not down at Canby Grove where we were for 4 years. It's warm, and if I need to use the restroom, I can walk right around the corner. Anyways, just a quick side note. I did find out, I guess, a lot of people in our church were just using trees at Canby Grove. I don't know if you were aware of that. I was told that later. But, do what you have to do, I guess. But that was then, not here, okay? Not here. This is in a neighborhood, so anyways. Tonight, this is the next parable about prayer. And just like the last one, I'm so thankful that the Lord actually tells us right at the beginning of this, or Luke does when he writes it, why this parable is being given. Luke 18, starting at verse 9. Jesus also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus: God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but he beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. It's always good for us to remember that. One of the things that is common in the Bible, it's actually a passage that's usually quoted out of the Gospel of James, chapter 4, verse 6, but it's found a few places in the Old Testament, is that God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humbled. The way I learned that verse was, God resists the proud, but draws near to the humble. And I like that kind of imagery there, that for a proud person, God literally resists him, pushes away from him, works against him. But to those who are humble, God gives grace. He draws near to them. And I think it's something that we really need to grab a hold of with this. In this section in Luke, we've been seeing over and over and over again Jesus basically confronting the Pharisees. We haven't read a lot in the last couple chapters about the teachers of the law or the lawyers. We haven't heard anything about the Sadducees. He's really been focused on the Pharisees. Part of it is just location. What we saw at this time in Jesus' day was the Sadducees were the more progressive religious leaders and theologians, and they tended to have their center of power in Jerusalem or in other cities, whereas the Pharisees were very conservative, both in their politics and in their theology, and they tended to be more in the rural areas. It's the same thing we see today, by and large, the same things we see. And here, though, as Jesus is heading towards Jerusalem, he's going through a lot of rural communities and areas, and he is confronted over and over with the Pharisees. Now, in this, he does use the Pharisee as an example in his parable, but note, he's not saying this just to the Pharisees. Luke tells us that this parable is being told for some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. So it's not just the Pharisees that fall into this trap. By and large, I would say it's people fall into this trap, that we tend to trust in ourselves. Everybody wants to be righteous. And when I say that, we tend to instantly think of righteousness in terms of, bright shining light, holy white robes, things like that. Growing up at Canby Christian Church, there was one particular room that I think when it was designed was meant to be the holy and the righteous room. I found it one time playing hide and seek, and it was in the basement of the church. And I found out later it was the prayer room. It had been built and decorated like in the 70s or something. And how many of you, anyone else from Canby Christian as kids know what I'm talking about? Okay, this room, I know it was supposed to be the holy prayer room where you were righteous and stuff, but the pews were red, the carpet was red, the curtains were red, and I thought it was like some kind of weird temple to Satan or something in there. But that's just as a kid. But you look at it, it was this idea that there's this sacred, holy space, righteous. That's kind of what we tend to think of. But think more of this. How many of you, when you're in an argument, you like to be right? That's why we argue, right? I don't know anyone that argues and they're wrong and they're arguing that they're wrong. We argue because we want to be right. And that's pretty much what it means to be righteous. We want to think of ourselves being in the right. And some areas you might not have that issue, but most of us have it in certain areas. For me, I'm a pastor, so when I get together with groups of pastors or theologians, you quickly see the righteousness come out amongst us when we want to argue and we want to be right. I'm a musician, and holy smokes, musicians are prickly. We all want to be right. Like I have the right tempo. No, you have the right tempo. Here's the deal. The pastor has the right tempo. That was me being righteous again. You look at it, and that's kind of what it is. All of us have tendencies where we want to be righteous or be in the right, to trust in our own knowledge, our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own experiences, and to treat people that are opposite of us or different with contempt. It's just something we have to be very careful with. So Jesus gives this incredible parable. You look at it, and there's two men. First of all, the Pharisee. In this culture, the Pharisee was one of the pinnacles of society. If you wanted a career, you wanted to have power, fame, be respected, be well known, Pharisee. People in the religious community in Israel looked up to these people. Non-religious people in communities either looked up to them or they feared them. They were in seats of honor. There was a time in our country where that was the case for pastors. We're ranked pretty low now. I think we're right above congressmen and lawyers, but just barely. You look at it, and that's just kind of what's happened because of scandals and different things. Not so in this time. They were held up in seats of honor. It was a way, if you didn't come from a wealthy family, to possibly be raised up. This man was someone who is in the temple praying. And you look at this. There's a part of it, he's praying correctly. Over and over again. In the Psalms, we are told to be thankful, right? In the New Testament, we're told to be thankful. In fact, when people say, I want to know God's will for my life, low-hanging fruit, Paul says, what? Pray, be joyful always, pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you. That's awesome, right? But to give thanks in all circumstances, and we're told to pray with thanksgiving in our hearts, right? So here's a man. He is a religious leader. He knows the word of God. He's ministering to other people. He is going to the temple courts to pray. Since he's a Pharisee, probably at least 3 times a day to do that. And he starts out directing his prayers where they should be directed, God. And he starts out, I thank you, right? I thank you. And then it goes downhill from there. That I'm not like other men. Instantly, he puts himself above other people, and you get into it. It's because of the things he does, or the things he doesn't do, rather. He's not an extortioner. He's not unjust. He's not an adulterer. And he's definitely not like that tax collector right there. You look at it, and he's comparing himself to other people. In some ways, we might have a tendency to do this when we pray and we give thanksgiving. It's very a fine line from saying, Lord, thank you for the good life you've given me. Thank you for, the money you've given me, the home you've given me. Thank you that I've handled my money well, not like my brother who just has gambled it away. Lord, thank you for my job and that you gave me that promotion this year. And Lord knows I worked hard for it, not like Bob down in accounting, you know? You see what I'm saying? It's a very fine line for us to slide in to the trap that we see with this man right here. And the fact that he fasts twice a week, that's just crazy right there. Never done that in my life. Another confession to you. He gives tithes over everything he does. It's incredible, this man. He is a religious man, a man of the cloth, a man that other followers of God would look up to as an example. And then there's the tax collector. A little bit of information about tax collectors at this time. Tax collectors were employed by Rome. The taxes they collected weren't for the temple. It wasn't the temple tax. It was for Rome. And we get upset about our taxes today. When you look at what was going on there, even more reason to be upset with it. You would think that it would go for things that would benefit them, but the majority of their taxes went right back to Rome. It just went right back to Rome. There was some projects. In fact, Herod the Great, one of the reasons he was called the Great was because of all of the different civic things he did. Building aqueducts, roads, building up cities, amphitheaters, just beautiful works of architecture that he brought to the Jewish people, even remodeling and adding on to the temple itself. But they taxed the people very heavily. The tax collectors were Jewish people Jewish men that were employed by Rome to take money from the people, and they could do it by force, okay? The way they got paid was they were to collect the tax and then add on top of it what they wanted. And basically would add on extra taxes, getting rich off of the people. The tax collectors at the time, were looked down upon so much as like traitors to the Jewish people that there's several things about them. The Babylonian Talmud placed tax collectors alongside murderers and robbers. The rabbis taught that tax collectors were disqualified witnesses in court. They were social outcasts, utter disgraces to their family. The rabbis excommunicated tax collectors from synagogues. Tax collectors were not allowed to exchange their money at the temple treasury, meaning that they weren't allowed to go in and tithe from their money. They weren't allowed to go in and use their money at the temple to purchase sacrifices, so they were excluded from worship. And rabbis even consider it lawful to lie in almost any conceivable way to avoid paying taxes to tax collectors. Basically, these guys were major outcasts in their living space, in their communities. And yet, here's a tax collector. He is there in the temple courts, where he's not allowed to give praise, tithes, offering that way. He's looked down upon by everybody around him. And his posture is that he will not even lift up his eyes to heaven. He won't even look up. He's actually in a posture of worship. We tend to think of the term worship meaning praise today. What we do before a service is a worship service. The word worship in the Old Testament actually means face down. That's what the word means. It means to just be laying on the ground prone before God, face down. That is basically what this man is doing. Face down, will not even look up to heaven. The guilt, the shame. He's beating his chest at this prayer time. And he asks for mercy. He asks for mercy. The word there, when he's saying be merciful, is a word that is used in the Septuagint version of the Old Testament. and it's used to describe the Day of Atonement, when a sacrifice was made to wash away and cover all of your sins. So that's what he's asking for when he's asking for God to be merciful. He's asking for God's grace upon him to wash away every sin that he has. Now you look at this, and for us, I mean, this seems pretty black and white when I look at it, right? Two examples, one good, one bad. And in the way Jesus puts it up, in that time, for everybody hearing it, they would have thought Pharisee good, tax collector bad. But, we've been around church, so we know Pharisee bad, tax collector good, right? That's the way we tend to view it. I tend to be a news junkie. I don't know what I'm doing with my foot here. Let me take that down. But I tend to be a news junkie, get into politics way too much, way too much, more than I should. And I get outraged by different things. I get worked up. Every once in a while, my wife will say, "Why are you listening to that?" And my response a lot of times now is, I guess to make myself mad, I should probably turn it off, shouldn't I? That happens a lot to me. Here's an article that I was reading Monday. President Biden, and this is going to push buttons. I'm just letting you know, right? President Biden made history last week when he granted clemency to more than 1,500 people with a sweeping list of commutations and pardons, right? Like before that was Barack Obama, and it was like 300 and some. He's at 1,500, right? And that's all in one day. Like that's incredible. Like just pardoning all these people. And a lot of people are up in arms about this. Like, whoa, what are you doing, buddy? Like, really? You're just signing all this? Like, what's going on? However, the move was met with fierce backlash from critics pointing out various names on the clemency list included individuals who cost taxpayers tens of millions of dollars through their fraudulent actions. Among those covered in what the Biden White House is calling the largest single-day act of clemency by a U.S. president was Rita Crundwell. Rita Crundwell, a former comptroller in Dixon, Illinois. Crundwell was convicted and sentenced to nearly 20 years behind bars for using her position to steal nearly $54 million from the small town best known for the boyhood home of Ronald Reagan. And it goes on, talking about the outrage with this. Here's a woman that had a position in the government, and she, over a long period of time, stole $54 million, and in 2012 was convicted and went to prison. So she's been in prison for the last 12 years with this, all right? Why am I reading this? She stole from taxpayers, is convicted, and the president was merciful towards her, and people are mad. Okay, is this pushing any buttons? This is how people would have felt when they heard Jesus tell this parable. We brush over it so quickly. They hated tax collectors. They were like this comptroller, taking money from the towns they lived in, getting rich off of it. And the difference was, for this comptroller, she did it illegally. They did it as traitors, and it was legal in Rome. All right? This would have been audacious for Jesus to say and to give this type of message. Like, really? You're saying the religious leader who reads his Bible, who tithes, who goes to the temple, who does all the sacrifices. I mean, this guy probably would even go to all 3 of our Christmas Eve services, right? And then there's This person who steals all of that money from the community? And when that person says, Lord, please have mercy on me, Jesus has the audacity to say, that's the righteous act right there. Not that man who looks down on everybody else and is looking at his own works. This man's problem was pride. This is the whole thing between humility and pride, right? God resists the proud but draws near to the humble. And we've got to grasp that. Pride, oh man, it's the worst of sins. It is the worst of sins. On our list of sin, depending on what era we grew up in, depending on what culture, it might be the worst sin is sexual sin. It might be the worst sin is theft. Might be alcoholism, drug abuse. Might be your skirt's too short. Mallory. I'm just kidding. That's just a scary thought. I don't ever want to see you in a scary man. That's a scary thought. You look at it and it's like we have these different things on our scale of what the worst sins are. From my perspective, it's pride. It's pride. As a pastor, when I'm talking with people and there's something going on, it might be a counseling situation, it might be someone who's constantly struggling and pointing fingers other places. People who are proud, how do you help them see what their sin is? Because they're not humble enough to listen to anybody. They're right. They're better. They don't want to listen. It takes a miracle or God dropping them all the way to a pigsty before they're willing to actually be humble enough to listen to somebody who's trying to help. Years ago, we, in a small group, were going through Job. Got the J right. We were going through the book of Job. Normally, when I go through books of the Bible, I just go from beginning to end, verse by verse, chapter by chapter. It was the only time I didn't do that. When you look at Job, it's a very long book of the Bible. It's actually, most scholars will say, the oldest book in the Bible, even older than Genesis. You look at it, and what happens in Job is you have Job's three friends, each one after the other, telling Job why all these bad things have happened to him, and then Job responds at the end, right? So it's friend one, friend two, friend three, Job responds. And that pattern happens 3 times. And they all basically say the same exact thing 3 times each time. So to speed it up, we kind of just did more of a survey of it. But at the time, there was a gentleman who started attending our church, and he came to this group, and it became really clear. This guy, he had a lot of pride. His family was blown up, but it was her fault, their fault, other people's fault. His job that he lost, it was his boss's fault, his coworker's fault. Everything, it was always everybody else. He was always right. When we were in the small group, he always had the answer. He was always very sure of himself. And then we got to this one time where it's just before before God answers Job and explains what's really going on. And what this man said was, you look at Job, and the reality is Job was a righteous man, and he didn't have any faults. He didn't have any faults. This was just something that God brought upon him, but, he walked before the Lord in pure righteousness, and he didn't do anything wrong. And I really believe that we can get there, and we can be like Job as well. And started talking about, like, the Sermon on the Mount and all this other stuff. And man, I'm trying to stop him. And then finally, I just had to cut him off and interrupt him because I knew what was coming next. What comes next? When God finally speaks, he says, all right, Job, gird yourself up like a man, because now I'm going to talk. Who are you? Were you there when the foundations were laid, Job? If so, tell me. And the end of Job is one of the most incredible passages in the Bible when you read about God and how awesome he is and how far he is above creation, and he shows how small we are, right? And what you realize is Job is proud. He was proud. And it took all this for him to realize it. That's the thing, pride. I mean, what do you do with this? What do you do with it? God resists the proud but draws near. It's not about all of these external religious things we do. It's about this right here. David got it right. David got it right, you know. God said after Saul that he would choose a man who was after his own heart. And David wasn't perfect. I mean, you compare the sins of King Saul and you compare the sins of David, like sleeps with a woman, then has her husband murdered. I don't know, on my scale of bad, that's pretty bad. I think that's probably just about the only thing I haven't heard from someone at church ever. I've heard a lot of confessions, but no one yet has said I murdered somebody, you know. But you look at it, and that's like horrible. And yet he repented. He repented. You know, Psalm 51 has David's prayer. And I love verse 10 and 12. You'll know this from songs. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence, and take not your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and uphold me with a willing spirit. I love that prayer. It's like the tax collector. Be merciful with me, Lord, right? Verse 17, he gets it right. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart, O God. You will not despise. You will not despise. I've told our elders and our staff that one of the things I'm praying about, somewhat fearful for, because since we've finished this building and moved in here, we've seen a lot of growth and a lot of new people coming. And I started feeling like, man, I feel like we're going to lose who we've been as a church, who we've been. And I wasn't quite sure what that meant exactly, but I think this passage right here sums it up. We had, how many of you were here the day our sewers system backed up that Sunday? That was awful. That was awful. I mean, brand new building. It's a Sunday where we're doing baptisms in here, and there's all these visitors, and then we're like, oh, one toilet's backed up. Wait, all three women's toilets, are there 4 in there? Do women have more than us? All right, all the ladies' bathrooms backed up, and then all of a sudden the men's, and then the bathrooms down the hallway are backed up. And we're like, what's going on? So as we have all of this stuff happening, everything is backing up with the sewage system. And we ended up getting like a really negative email sent to the church. It was someone who was visiting that day with their family, and they said, you know, we know that the Sunday we visited, it was probably off Sunday because your whole sewage system backed up at the church. And they went down a list of complaints and why they would never return here. And we were just like, okay, that's nice. I mean, if you go to a restaurant and there's a fire in the kitchen, don't expect the owner of the restaurant to shake your hand at the door. But, you know, it was just all these complaints of things that we didn't do for them while they were here. And I read it with our staff, and I said, here's the deal, guys. This is a highly churched person. They're churched. And they're like, what do you mean? How do you know that? I said, look, they're upset that they didn't get a bulletin that day. Only church people call it bulletins. Everywhere else it's called a program, okay? You know, they want fellowship. Like, nobody outside the church calls it fellowship. You know, it's just, they're using church words and all this stuff, and they were clearly from a church before they moved here where they were used to being catered to all the time and all these specific things. And I was just like, you know, it's probably a good thing they're not here, because that's not who we are. That's not who we are. Guys, we always want to be the place where that tax collector or this fornicator or a liar or an alcoholic can come and beat their chest right along with us, saying, God, have mercy.